I just want to talk a little bit today about something that's sort of been bugging me for a little while, and it's a good debate to have. It's a healthy debate, and I'd be interested to get other people's thoughts rather than just blowing it, back in my face if you disagree with me. Now, a lot of people believe that we are currently in what one would call a golden era of the heavyweight division. I personally completely agree. I believe that that was born on the 28th of November 2015 when Vladimir Klitschko lost his lost the unified titles to Tyson Fury. Now, obviously, you remember that fight very well. Tyson Fury just showed more heart, more grit, and went there and snatched the belts away and picked Klitschko to bits. Now, since then, obviously, we've seen a bit of a revitalisation in the heavyweight division. Obviously, when you look back and look at, the Klitschko era was a poor era. Now, I've got a good analogy that I want to describe it to, right? So the Klitschko era, it reminds me almost of, I've always been a fan of American rap. I was all brought up on American rap. And you think back to the Bling era, where you had, people like 50 Cent, Eminem, Lil Wayne, and really outside of those big three, until sort of Kanye come along in the late 2000s, they were pretty unmatched. Who was outside of that? I know I'm forgetting a few, but people like Obi Trice. It was a big drop off, is what I'm saying. Similarly to the Klitschko era, really, where the fringe contenders were people like Sam Peter, who were just not on Klitschko's level. It was almost like A level and then C level, CD level, and that's really what you got for the majority of the Klitschko era, and that's what we were seeing. And this is sort of similar thing with rap, and it meant that there was almost 50 Cent and Eminem, Lil Wayne, obviously they're regarded now as all-time greats, just as the Klitschkos are, and the reason I draw this analogy is, a few years ago there was equally a revitalisation in the American rap scene. And at the time, a lot of people, particularly the 90s fans, as you're going to hear, were completely, no, of course it's not. These people are nowhere near as good. And it's exactly the same things we're hearing now. But that sort of golden era, I suppose you could say, of the mid-2010s, I guess you could say, of American rap is now starting to wane a little bit. That wasn't a pun, it could have been. Starting to wane a little bit, and I think now people are looking back and completely seeing it for what it was and saying, people, some of the albums that come out, just off the top of my head, things like Good Kid, Mad City, To Pimp a Butterfly, Triple X, The Trusty Exhibition, Oxymoron, Doris, I Don't Like Shit, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, Forest Hill Drives, Eye Drops, Long Live ASAP, Pinata, Trap Lord, Imperial, Too Hard to Riot, Before the Money, all the Run the Jewels work, the Saturation series, All American Badass, etc., etc. You could talk all day. And at the time all this stuff was coming out, everyone was saying, oh no, this is nowhere near as good as the 90s stuff. The people, rappers from the 90s are 10 times better than this, None of these would make top 30, top 50 all-time best albums or all-time best rappers. Now the dust has had time to settle. A few of, people are starting to look back and reflect and say, that was a bit of a golden era. And at the time, for a lot of people in it, they could see that. They could say, because it felt like there was a great album coming out each month, each week at points. A bit like how we feel like at points, particularly around the sort of 2017 time, we felt like we were getting a good show every week. And I'm seeing those parallels, and at the same time, people really at the time didn't really want to see it, did they? And I think it's only when we look back in, say, 5 years or so, we might actually start to be able to appreciate, what we've got. Say, with things like, people like Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, Usyk now moving up, Povetkin, Ruiz, White, Hunter, Chisora, Ortiz, Parker, people like this. And we'll look back and go, this was a really solid era and a really good era where you had sort of A level and then lots of B level fighters that were sort of challenging, which you haven't really had historically, particularly not in the Klitschko era, did you? So I think we're going to look back, and similarly, as I say, there was always those criticisms there of rap when it sort of hit a new sort of high point again for the first time, and it's probably really since the 90s, in the mid-2010s, and since then, it's started to wane a little bit since, the SoundCloud era has sort of come in. But now it's allowed there to be that introspection. And I say all that to say this, is that I completely expect the exact same things to happen with the boxing. I think once these people start to retire, because they are starting to, they're getting up there into the 30s now, the likes of Fury, Wilder and Joshua. And I think once they do retire, or at least start coming to the end, we're really going to be able to look back and appreciate what we've got, because even if you don't believe that these are all-time greats, one thing we can completely agree that it's one of the most open and competitive eras for, decades. It's as open as it's been, possibly ever. It's really still up for grabs. If Wilder could knock out Fury in the rematch and knock out Joshua, that's not outside the question. Fury at the moment looks like he's leading to be that man, but then Fury with his inconsistencies, there's nobody. I would not be confident of Fury having a long title reign at all. In fact, I believe he will get upset, because it just, you follow Fury's career up until now, and it suggests that may well happen. Likewise, what happens if Fury beats Wilder, meets Joshua in the rubber match, and then Joshua knocks him out? Then Joshua's the number one guy. So it's still really open, but I think, as I say, we're going to look back on this era and really start to appreciate it for what it is. When people are still, trying to compare it to the 90s, compare it to the 80s, compare it to the 60s, I think until we let it marinate and sort of look back, we're not going to appreciate what we've got. But there's one thing I can say, and this is that this is by far the highest profile boxing's had for probably a couple of decades now, and by far the most competitive heavyweight division we've had in many a year. And I think it's going to be a difficult thing to say, because I don't think people will agree with me at the moment, but I completely think that in the not too distant future, we will look back on at least one or two of the fighters from this era as all-time greats. I know that's something that people won't want to hear, but you can make an argument Usyk already is an all-time great, for crying out loud. So I would be very, very surprised if either Fury, Wilder or Joshua doesn't come out to be considered an all-time great when it's all said and done. If not one of them, if not two of them, you know what I mean? I think you could already argue Fury and Joshua are already British boxing all-time greats. As much as I'm sure that pains a few people to say. Even Dillian Whyte, are we pretending that Dillian Whyte if John Ruiz in the 2000s could have picked up a belt, are we really, and John Ruiz and, what was his name? Valuev picked up titles, are we really, and Chagayev, if all three of them could pick up belts, Dillian Whyte would have picked up a belt in that era. Do you see what I mean? So, as I say, I think we're in a really competitive era. We're in a fantastic era, and I don't think we will appreciate this era until it's gone. Oh, and just to interject before I go, I think another thing that we probably forget is that even arena fights in the UK are just so rare, let alone stadium fights, let alone Wembley being sold out. Go back 10-15 years ago through to the sort of Frank Maloney era, the Dave Caldwell era. That was a dark time, and I think we forget how far we've come in British boxing, especially in that time. So I do think there probably will be a bit of a regression, but I don't expect a total regression. I expect at least the reverberations from what this generation have done to last for a few years to come. So just to state, I don't believe we will completely roll back to how things were before, but I envision a dip, put it that way. But again, let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. If you do disagree with me, I do understand your perspective. I can, I can see that, but let me know what you think, because I'm interested to hear what other people think, and let me know, and take care.